So AIM 3.3 should be in your book. How did factories impact life? So on we go. I know yesterday in the classwork we talked about, what are some of the important kind of developments of the Industrial Revolution, one of them being the assembly line. And we said that I would show you a little bit more on the assembly line today. So what you're seeing here is like the earliest version of the assembly line. The assembly line is developed by Henry Ford, who is the namesake of Ford Motor Company. So these are the Ford cars that you see on the road. He kind of invented the assembly line, and what it was an efficient way of assembling and building cars, where one person's job was just wheels. Like you just put wheels on the car. So as these cars continued to come down the conveyor belt, this person would just put on the wheel, put on the wheel, put on the wheel, put on the wheel, every car all the way down. So this is kind of the most primitive form of that, and we can definitely. So that video clip is actually from Ford Motor Company also. So you can see kind of how within the same company, the evolution of the technology that they've developed. So that's what, that's what efficiency looks like for sure. All right, here we go. Factory system. I'll give you a second. So prior to the factory system, the manner in which goods were produced is often referred to as the cottage industry or domestic industry or domestic system. So when things are kind of made at home. But this new factory system places workers in factories where they are supervised by management. And the idea is that these factories use machines powered by steam, which is kind of created by burning coal, and this leads to an increase in productivity and what's called mass production. This is goods being produced very, very quickly, usually by machine. And thank you. So before the factory system, the system that they use to produce goods is called domestic system or the home system. But the factory system places workers in factories where they're supervised, and they use machines to produce goods. Those machines are powered by steam, which is created by burning coal. So that's where those raw materials that we spoke about a couple days ago kind of come into play. This results in mass production, which is goods being made very, very quickly. We also mentioned that, just kind of basic economics dictates that the faster that something is produced, the less costly it becomes. Time is money, right? So the less time you spend making a thing, the less you can charge for that thing. That's the general truth. The good example is Ferrari, for example. Ferraris are, $250,000 because they are handmade. They're assembled by hand. A lot of the parts are produced in factories, but the assembly is done by hand. So the immense amount of time that it takes to do that has a direct impact on the price and how much it costs, right? All right, efficiency. So efficiency is something that we really just discussed, the idea that if we're going to make things very quickly, they're going to cost less, essentially. So this has a significant impact on the supply and demand curve. Now, this is something that you will deal with a lot more in your senior year. But what this shows is the supply and demand curve with regard to price and quantity. So what we are going to focus on is the supply line. The supply line is this light bluish purple line here. Now, when things are being made by hand, the supply line exists as it's shown in that blue, in that bluish purplish color. But as what the factory does is it makes things faster, more efficiently, and it moves that supply line to the right. Now, that big red dot you see where the supply and the demand curve meet is the price point. That is the price at which each individual item is priced as a result, right? So when we have so much of a thing and so many people want a certain thing, that determines the price. So as the demand curve stays where it is, the supply line moves with the factory system because we're now producing more things at a quicker pace therefore making them cheaper. And this graph explains why those things become cheaper. It is because that supply line is moving. So that point of intersection between the supply curve and the demand curve is overall coming down, right? So we're just looking at in relation to price. So price being the vertical axis, you can see the two big maroon dots in relation to each other. As the supply line shifts, the overall price of that good starts to come down. Okay, last slide here. All right, so all of these developments result in a system called industrial capitalism. Um, we spoke about during the French Revolution and the Enlightenment unit about laissez-faire economics. This is Adam Smith's idea that government should keep their hands off of economic functions. And the reason that they believe that is because if the government does not intervene in economic functions, the owners of factories have an opportunity to create this system. And the creation of this system leads to a dramatic increase in the production of manufactured goods and therefore the gross domestic product of any particular country. So, long story short, what we're saying is that the government has a vested interest in the viability of all of these factories. And the less regulations and restrictions the government puts on those factories, the higher the profit margins and the greater the contribution to the gross domestic product of a particular country. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if you own a factory, your profit depends on how much money you bring in, and then you subtract the amount of money that you have to pay out. Now you have to pay out for, workers. You got to pay people a wage to work in your factory, right? You have to pay out for raw materials. You have to pay out for equipment to use. If you want to add safety measures and health and hygiene measures, all of that stuff costs you money. So the more money you spend on producing a good, the less profit you're going to collect. So this system of kind of the factory system coupled with the laissez-faire economic approach of governments leads to a system where owners are exploiting workers and forcing them into situations where they are working for very low wages, very, very low standards of safety and hygiene, all in the name of maximizing productivity. Consequences be damned. It's really about maximizing that productivity so that we can maximize profits and contribute to the economic growth of the country as a whole. That's the important part to understand.